G'day legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day. You've had a great weekend and your week has begun as well as possible. Now legends, thanks for having me back. I know it has been the best part of a week since I've seen you last. I think this is actually the longest I haven't uploaded for in a very long time, and I'm not sitting on a beach with Zelensky, Putin, Xi and Trump sipping Métis. I have been incredibly unwell, finishing my 10th round of chemotherapy. I have 2 more rounds to go, and I can't tell you how excited I am to get this over and done with. So I am still struggling a fair bit. I have been incredibly fatigued and tired, sick, and also with insomnia. So please, if I get a bit off on a tangent, just bear with me. But thank you for being here. Now, legends, we have a lot, of course, to catch up on. I want to talk about drones. I want to look at the maps over the past several days, where things are moving. Are we seeing the beginning of a larger Russian offensive? I'll give my opinions on that at this stage of this attritional war. We need to look at what Macron, of course, the leader of France, has said about Russian frozen assets that Europe has, as well as secondary sanctions. And then going further on those secondaries, look at what Zelensky is saying about the US not implementing some of this as well, and where Zelensky's taking a bit of a harder line against the US, but where I think Zelensky doesn't understand where the US is sitting in their position, that it's not that the US isn't or won't put these in. It's that they are saying, well, if Europe's not willing to do it, why are we going to do it? So we've got a lot in that to go over. But there's something just in the beginning that I've been thinking about for a couple of days, and I really do want to talk about. I did forget about this completely. I think I mentioned it on a podcast, but I can't 100% remember. A few weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, I had a few people hit me up going, hey, Willie, you've been to Israel. What's the go? And I'm like, what do you mean? And these people had reached out to me who had seen I've been to Israel because they had been hit up to go to Israel on a trip. And my advice was no. My advice on traveling to any of these destinations is yes, absolutely, go for it. But if it is a go-along ride, especially if there's money involved, any of this, my advice to them was steer very clear of that. And even if you're not getting paid, if it's all free, when something is free, then you are the product. Anyway, I'd sort of forgotten about this, and then all over my Instagram, my Twitter, my feeds that I follow people, I see a hell of a lot of people, especially in the conservative world, all in Israel at the same time. And I had a few other people who also observed this as well. And it was very, very clear. And what I'll say is this isn't like filming a NordVPN ad. This is significantly more serious. You can't be calling yourself independent knowing how some of this then works. And in my opinion, with zero pushback on a lot of this and shilling a lot, you've been seen as useful. And to be honest, it might be too hard of a word, but compromised in a way. Now, I copped a lot of flack for how poor my last trip was and the videos I got out of Israel. And that was because for 2 times I've got no media accreditations, would not give them to me, got no access, got no nothing. But I'm not willing to buy into or that product of, I want to be able to say and do what I see. And the funny thing is with a lot of this, and where you can tell that there's definitely some skewing of information, is especially these like ultra pro-Ukrainian bloggers, they fail to mention at any point ever about Israel's ongoing relations with Russia and the lack of sanctions, all of that in there too. Now, people, of course, on the internet blame me all the time for this. I am open and honest, I've never taken a cent other than my links like the PayPal, the Patreon, the merch or the AdSense money of this. And I think it is a very, very dangerous game to be playing. And I think it was very obvious to a lot of people at the moment, because I was thinking about, so if I know more than several people who I know they don't know each other, they're from different countries and they're all in the exact same spots at the exact same time, it's an interesting thing. And I would say Israel is absolutely desperate to try and attempt to save some narrative at the moment, especially that conservative narrative that has absolutely slipped away in the past, say, 6 to 12 months, that did hold for about 6 months. So just be cautious of that, okay? Now, legends, let's actually get into the video. Now, a couple of things on drones. People always talk about massive secondaries against China and banning any Chinese imports and all this blah, blah, blah. But then I found this interesting article, and this was actually said to me, and I said this to you guys probably 2 years ago. I did a speech with a dear friend of mine who works in the drone industry, and he said, trying to cut off Chinese drones may have more of an actual impact on Ukraine than you'd think. And this was from a Ukrainian media channel back on the 12th, looking at the volume of drones coming in from countries like China, Germany, Poland, or Taiwan. And we have a look here, 23, 24, 25. Now, what we can see is a minor reduction from 23 to 25, but it's still around 90%. Those FPVs, those Mavics, all of this. And if you were to overlay this then with a cost ratio, it would be dramatic in the other way. You can see where the volume has shifted over the last then months and years too. Now, another thing that I saw interesting, and you know that I don't really talk about strategic airstrikes because I believe it's just another battlefield item. It's another part of war. I don't think that strategic strikes, and history doesn't show that these are ultimately the wonder weapon of war that many make it out to be, whether it be drones or missiles. But we report on when we see some interesting bits or massive amounts. So the other night, there was 600 claimed just over Russian drones go into Ukrainian airspace. Now, something interesting about this is the vast majority of these tended to operate what I would say is in a tactical or battlefield way. So we see that virtually none went Kiev, none went to Lviv, none went to a lot of the air bases out here. We're looking at the yellow lines in this. They're really all along the front line, and this is something that you and I have observed, is as that number of particularly Garan 2 and 3 drones has increased, and as the new antennas came in those weapon systems too, we see them being used more and more in a tactical sense, so like Frontline or say within 30 kilometres of the front line, rather than that strategic multiple hundreds of kilometres. And that is something I think that we will see more and more. And this is still why a lot of those drones, that gentleman who said to me, he still reckons it's actually, he would consider it a cruise missile. He said, if those drones, if you can't steer it and change targets and come back if needed, it's more of a really cheap cruise missile. And a lot of the way those drones are used, a lot of the way the FABs are used, it sort of goes into that overarching heavy artillery space. Just something for you to think on. So let's go onto the maps. And we have a lot of changes and a lot of days as well. So of course, here is Ukraine in the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Any red check that you will see, this red check indicates ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours, and the blue check being the same for Ukraine. But of course, we'll be going back on some days. But I wanted to start here. Someone who has a fantastic reputation, but a relatively small following. So please go and follow Mr. Thorkill65 on Twitter or X. Everyone is waiting for the start of the Great Russian Offensive in the Pokrovsk-Konstantinivka direction. In my opinion, it's already underway. Something bad is happening for Ukraine south of Druzhkivka, in this area, Novopavlivka, Mykolaiv, towards Raisky. Now, this is just south of Kramatorsk. So let's just go down and have a look where he's talking. So this is Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Raisky. Down in here, he says that something bad is happening. Again, doesn't really give us much to go off, but he's been very, very reliable, which is actually very difficult to find in this space. So just keep an eye on this. Now, we've heard for a long time Russia's regrouping assets. The lack of kilometre square gain somewhat tells us that, and there's going to be some grand offensive action, okay? And people are doing the same that people did in early 23. They push through here and tanks through there and dudes doing this and whatever. I don't see the point at the moment. Russia at the moment has, being conservative with it, we have really the advances are along the Velika front, but let's say the Novopavlivka, this envelopment, the Pokrovsk envelopment, Konstantinivka envelopment, the Seversk envelopment, we'll call this the Borova or Terny envelopment, the Kupiansk envelopment. Now, in my knowledge of attritional war and where I don't see that Ukraine is absolutely degraded to the point of which manoeuvre warfare would then be possible again, I don't see the point, especially on large movements like this that we're seeing turn into a bit of a failure now. I wouldn't be surprised to see very, very little actual movement, but an increase in drones and artillery. I know I somewhat lump them together to increase the attrition rate of these envelopments, because you've got several envelopments happening at once. Beyond these envelopments, there's a lot of open fields, so you're going to get stuck and bogged down back in cities. So will we see large movements? Eventually, I believe, if the war continues, yes, we will. Would I be surprised if we see very little kilometre squares? Absolutely. Like I've said, you could win an attritional war without ever actually making any ground, theoretically. The goal is attrition. The goal is not kilometre squares, okay? So let's have a look at the maps, though, because we still go over and it is important where we are looking. So let's look around Pokrovsk and Pokrovsk actual. We see some of the grey zone just coming out into here. Now, let's go back to the 17th, which is where I left off with you, till today. Realistically, not that much different, just some tiny differences in here. So, but trust me, there are big differences in some other areas. So let's have a look at this. I'll get this off the screen. You can see into Pokrovsk, Surak maps showing up across this road and into the centre area. So up across this, right into the centre of Pokrovsk. We know DRGs have been working in here for some time. As far as what this actually looks like at this point, I believe all of Pokrovsk is likely heavily grey at this point. So then let's go on to this eastern side. Now, this Kuchliv Yar still showing that this is holding out here. Let's go back to the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st. Realistically, not that much changes. A little bit just to the south around Novokonomanechne, but around this area, for what we have seen in the initial days of this, very little. So I'll show you a couple of Syriac maps. On day 1300, we see a Ukrainian advancement pushing into these trench systems around Pankivka. This is around the bottom of this, and then further we see where the Russians are pushing in to the east of Shenkovhe, but really out of this Popov Yar, Poltavka. But the best map that we have for you, and this is the most recent of the maps, is actually Mr. AMK mapping. Of course, you can go follow him here, where you do see that this isn't looking like a lot of maps where it is completely cut off and what they've spoken about, but there's been significant advancement by both the Ukrainians and the Russians. So let's work on the easier one first off, which is the Rusan Yar Poltavka, where Russia has made some ground. So the Rusan Yar area, we see where this reservoir is, talking that the Russians are right up to this reservoir right in here, so outside of the grey zone. And then we'll come just to the west of here, where he's saying that the Ukrainians have been pushing, coming around into Kuchliv Yar and around the base Mayak Pankivka area, which is fairly in line with where this map is showing, and trying to push down and around in the bottom of Nikanorivka as well. Trying to get down into, I can't read exactly what that one is, Boykivka, and trying to get right down into here, which by this map is showing, and particularly a potential cut off. Now, if there was a complete cut-off of this, would it be catastrophic for the war effort? Tactically, it would be very bad. Would it then mean that the tables are turned and the war is suddenly being won by Ukraine? No, it is not. There's not enough troops or assets in this. What will remain is several pockets. So I think the actual Russian emphasis on this is at the moment try to pull guys out. I don't think there's this, this, in my opinion, is not going, even if it falls as a house of cards back right down into Mayak, is not going to have severe effect everywhere else up and down the line. Now, I did this slightly different to what I wanted to do. What I did want to do initially was actually just go over the deep state map. So let's do that. Let's go up into Kupiansk. Now, this is somewhere we have seen a lot of changes over the past days. So 17th, well, 16th is actually when I saw you last. So we'll come to the 17th. We see Russia expand control on this Radkivka front into Kupiansk. And then we see on the 18th, further movement to the east of here, and to the north around Kindrishivka. And then we come up to the 19th, further movement in that axis, then to the 20th, a small bit of grey zone, and then up to today, you'll see where we are sitting now. So let's move on to this front. Then we have Syriac maps update. Now, he's showing relatively fairly the same, moving in this northwestern part of Kupiansk. And then we have this update here from Playfront. Now, this was a few days back, but I think this tells us a lot. It talks about this movement around Kindrashivka and the Radkivka, Moskovka area where Ukraine has pulled out around these forested areas and where Russia is exploiting that. But this is something interesting here, is the Ukrainians started to transfer 3rd Assault Brigade. So Azov, one of the better units of fighting, and we know 3rd Assault move around to stabilise areas. So they are moving from somewhere to stabilise somewhere else. And this is what the Russians are trying to do with this multi-front attritional warfare. The Russians responded by transferring Rubicon, so their sort of special forces higher-end drone unit, one of the most equipped and experienced on the Russian side, into this area. And this becomes this game of cat and mouse that attritional warfare turns into. So wait out and see on this. But again, I don't see any point in closing these up at this point in time, even if the capacity was there to do it. It makes sense for propaganda, but again, you don't make military decisions based on your propaganda. Your propaganda needs to support your military decisions. Would it help Russia propaganda information for them to draw assets from everywhere into Kharkivka to push across to Rozove? Yes, and collapse this area. Do they have the capability to do it? Yes, but not while holding these other areas as well. So it would jeopardize other fronts. So again, not making decisions based just on the information capacity of that. Okay, this is a hole this is the hole that Kursk fell into, was making decisions based on how it looks rather than how it affects the battlefield. Now, we're going to move up actually into Vovchansk, of course, where Russia has pushed across into Kharkiv Oblast, somewhere we don't hear about that much. Syriac, he's saying that there's been some small new advances in this sector by the Russian forces. Again, it's always hard to know around Vovchansk because it is just completely wiped out. Then we come to the north of Kupiansk, and this northeastern area right up in here, we have Milove, Umbane, where we did see this crossing a couple of months back, but never saw a true exploitation of this. But again, it does show drawing of multiple forces away. And for 2 days in a row, Syriac did show some fairly significant gains in here around Odradne. This is Odradne right down in here. So from right up in Milove down to Odradne in this sector, as well as then for a second day moving and taking Odradne actual. So if correct by Syriac, some say 3 kilometres from there and say some 7.5 kilometres from what is shown on this map. Again, whole Kharkiv Oblast, Kharkiv, very, very long way away. But as far as the ground control in here, it's still a very dangerous sector, and Ukraine needs to have massive amounts of assets tied up in here in case Russia does push. Again, with everything from tactics through to geopolitics, you always you counter not intention, you counter the capability. And if there's capability, even if there's not intention, you have to counter the capability. And this is why, even between friendly states, this is why I've said I think that relations between Germany and France are going to get a little bit more tense. Yes, there's no intention at the moment for them to ever fight. But again, states next to each other will eventually build counter for capability, even if the intentions aren't there, because intentions, they can change like that. Now let's move up in and around Kursk, Sumy region. We see a bit of blue in here, of course, where this has pushed back over the past couple of weeks. And then Tiat, Kino, we have one small update in here, basically saying that the Russian army has just managed to drive Ukraine out of the town, and there's a small change in and around Vasilivskia. Not really much to speak about on that front. But where we're going to come down into is Velika Novosilka Frontline, and especially the movements that we are seeing around here on different axes. So on the Hodorkovy envelopment of Novopadlivka, the whole movement on the Velika front, and also all the way down onto what we'll call the Huliopol front line. So what we do need to do is step back to the 17th, where I left you last time. So we see movement being made in the direction of Huliopol. Then we step up to the 18th. We see more movement made in and around this direction. More movement again. So as far as kilometre squares, where is Russia having the most success? Definitely around this front line. And this, of course, is in the direction of Zaporizhia and Dnipro. So this is definitely an area to keep an eye, because there is a chance some of the thin front lines down in here, fortifications, sit right in below where the Russians are. They sit to the south of where it is, and the Russians could get in behind that. And then we come to today, where we see Sosnivska, Beresove. There's multiple flags. Beresove has likely come under Russian control today, but we do have a lot of maps to show you around here. And we'll belt feed through some of these. So give you an idea, Sosnivska, Berestove, Novolenivka, and then we'll give you an idea as we go. I know this can be a little bit difficult to get your head around. The advances inside Berezove expelled the Ukrainian army from Sosnivska. So you can see Sosnivska, Berestove, where the Russians have been pushing on this front, and how this front is significantly more level, according to Suryak, than it is showing. See again, Novomaylivka, as well as northeast of Olehivsky, that they continued pushing on these advancements. So these advancements, you can see where Velikomaylivka is, Kalinivskia, Novomaylivka as well, and all of this. So this front line just pushing down. You can try and line up, I think some of the best ways is get where some of these main roads are, although this map can be absolutely terrible for this. You can see where Uspenivkia is running, and this is the road through Uspenivkia running up through in this direction. So confirming these movements in here, although Suryak is showing more ground being made. And we zoom out just a little bit. We're looking still in the same area, but we're talking Berezove area, so up to the north, Sosnivskia, but also down and around this Olivsky pocket as well. Again, we may refer to this as the Huliopol front in some time. But there was a pocket in here being reported by both AMK and by Mr. Suryak's map. So if we move up, we have Sosnivska, Novoselivska in here. So this is Novoselivska, this is Sosnivska, just to get an idea. And there's just a little area right back in here that did show for some time that there was Ukrainian forces that were encircled in this area. As far as what exactly happened here, I haven't been able to figure that out of anyone, but it does show on multiple maps that this area has now been closed up. So let's zoom back out, and then we have an AMK map. This is very clear of this whole area and more recent. So we do have around the Berezove area, you can see where this is just expanding out. Just to the south of here, we have where Novohorivka is. You can see further expansion of control around this front line as well. You can also see where this area has now closed up, where there was that encirclement. We're waiting on further confirmation of what exactly happened here. So let's then move on to the Velika East, and we'll call this the Novopavlivka pocket that is and has developed, of course, with Russia's pushes into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So let's have a look here. So the first one we're going to be looking at, apologies, is this map right in here. This southwest of Horokove and along the border of Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk. So we have Horokove and movement out into this direction here. And then further, right on this front, we have this further movement, and we have Udachnenskaya as well. So this is in the Muravka front line up here. So if we come right in, you have Muravka, you have what was that? I can't read it from here. Bilakivkia, that he's saying Muravka area is coming under control, further squeezing. Now another pocket is opening, and a lot of flat ground in here. Again, this flat open ground is a huge problem because you've got front lines, Ukrainian lines that sit in here. You have to get stuff from here somehow down into here. And we know supply with these drone units at the moment for the front line is absolutely chaotic. Now, let's have a look on the northern side, Ivanivka, Iskra, Filia area. We know this map in here probably looks significantly under what it is. In the north, Novopavlskoye, Komarskoye. Last 3 days, Russian army new position, southern shore of Vovcherivka, localities of Iskra and Zeleny Hay. So further ground, Iskra, Zeleny Hay. Again, we had geolocation footage showing Iskra, so right out to here, some 6 kilometres, that in my opinion, this is then Ivanivka. Pretty much all of this, I think, to the river has come under Russian control, and some areas likely on the northern side. Continue securing positions at the southern shore. So right up southern shore along here, we'll get a better idea in time, or geolocations as we go. Now, we are still belt feeding through some of this, lads. So then we have the Huliapol, Poltavka, Olevsky front. Now, again, some of these are going to be, it's not the same map, but these two front lines are not mutually exclusive of each other. Nothing in war is actually mutually exclusive. Everything has a point to play. That tactics develop operational victories develop strategy, or strategic victories influence politics influences the world and the survival or defeat of a state. So we have, again, right around this front line, of course, this is Huliapol front, but you can see it's in this Uspinivka area in here. That Syriac is showing further advancements again in the direction of Huliapol. Second map update again, we can see that Novohorivka, Kalyanivsky, so it's all this sector in here in the direction of Huliapol that is coming over and then further enveloping areas, smaller area like Poltavka. The amount of movement we've seen on the Velika front line over the past, let's just go back to the 10th and then we'll roll through this. Remember, this is the deep state Ukrainian map. You can get an idea of this just working away, and that's only over maybe a week and a half period of what I showed you. So keep an eye on this. Then we'll come up Konstantinivsky front. How much changes have we seen over the past, then say week? Pretty minor until we come up to really today. We do see this movement yesterday. Let's turn that back on into around Katadanivkia. And then to today, filling this in, and the troops that are enveloped down around Katadanivkia. This could turn into a absolute tragedy down around this front line. And I do believe I have a Toretsk map in here showing not movement on this direction, but further movement into Konstantinivsky itself. So keep an eye on this front line. While we're down here, let's move our way right down into the south region. See where this grey zone has extended along above this reservoir to the direct west of Stepnohursk. Syriac showing that this is actually in Russian-controlled territory. Now, we're going to come up to some ignored but very, very important areas. These important areas, of course, is the Seversk pocket and the Terney front. Now, the Terney front, this has had significant shifts since I last spoke with you. So if our map will not glitch out for a minute. So back on the 16th, let's turn this off. So we have 17th when I last spoke to you. We then will see an increase in grey zone. Up to the 19th, we have a large increase in red zone, a significant increase in red zone, depending where you'd want to measure this from. But let's go here to here. You're talking 5 kilometres. That is significant in the direction of Serezhne as well as Chandrila-Hove. Again, expanding this. You and I have spoken for weeks about the threat of north and south expansion of this front. And then up to today, sorry, this map is absolutely killing me today. It's all over the spot. You can see this is what the image we have today. Okay, so this is firstly the Terney front. But again, the Terney front is massively influencing south of here, being Liman, Siversk, and will influence Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and of course, down into Konstantinivsky. Again, things are not completely disconnected. So we see this map here, further movement in the direction of Serezhne, and then up around the top we have where Ukraine has been making some ground and pushes back around Novomylivka, Novy Mir as well. Then next Syriac updates in this direction here. We have further movements right in around Serezhne, Chandrila-Hove as well. Saying a lot of these areas, these are coming under control and advancing even to the west of here too. This tells us a lot because this is getting right on the north of Sloviansk and to the northwest now of Liman. Of course, things, as I said, not exclusive. We have then the Seversk, the Kremenar forested area. Let's come back down now from the 17th, 18th, 19th, not too much change in here. Still a lot of grey zone in here. This big finger knob heading out in this direction. Let's have a look then at some other maps in here. See what Syriac is showing. He's showing the remainder basically of this forest and the ostrich farm coming under control. Russian forces captured half the locality of Chandrila-Hove. Again, this is Chandrila-Hove right up in here. Again, his maps show multiple areas zoomed out, so it can be difficult to get an idea, but we're just looking around this forest. Russian army combing operations, the last part of the forest on day 1301, 1304, that this is being cleared of the Ukrainian army. So the last part of this forest down to the Donetsk River has been cleared of the Ukrainian forces according to Syriac maps. Now, I've probably missed a whole bunch of deep state map updates in that. I apologise, but we are just doing what we can. We did miss several days. Now, everyone loves to talk about frozen assets, 300 billion, bloody everything to send to Ukraine. Now, what we've said on the surface seems great. Behind closed doors, there's a lot of concern about this, even from Ukraine's most adamant supporters, such as Emmanuel Macron. And this interview today on CBS with Margaret Brennan, as the Trump administration has pointed the idea, there are billions of dollars sitting in European bank accounts that could be seized, for example, or that, here you could put more tariffs on China or sanctions on China. Are these valid arguments by the administration? Now, just a side piece on this, Netanyahu threatening China, that'll end really well. Macron, he says to this question, look, regarding the frozen assets, we are all very much attached to compliant with the international rules. And you cannot seize these assets from the central bank, even in such a situation. And I think it's a matter of credibility. And it's very important that our countries remain, I'm guessing, he says credible, and do respect the international laws. Now, you can say what you will about the credibility and respecting the international laws, but what we have spoken about is if this money is seized, you have people who have money in yen, in money in any other currency, looking and going, well, I can't have it there because if my government does something, it reduces that credibility of the euro, the pound, the dollar massively, as well as the actual laws around this. Of course, we know stepping over those laws means nothing to many. Because this is our problem everywhere. If we speak of the Middle East, if we speak about the situation in Ukraine, when some countries start to disrespect international laws and when we are not sufficiently strong, this is the beginning of a total chaos. So we will respect international law. Now, what I will say about the rules, the so-called rules-based order and respecting of international law, the hypocrisy in this is just fucking astronomical. And this international community, what the fuck is the international community? There's no world police that sits over the top. The international community is a term made up to try and sound more legitimate. There's no international community. The world is by itself archaic with no over-the-top world police happening. I asked about China aspect of the administration. Would you like to push back on China more? Look, I think we have our own diplomacy on China and we're very much attached to our independence. This is normal. De-risking strategy. We're not in a decoupling strategy. So there's no pressure from the administration to do that. We know there is pressure from the US that if we will do it, if you do it. In my opinion, the US knows they're not going to do it. The US doesn't actually want Europe to do it, and it's a good way out for Trump. That's how I am seeing it. But again, this is a very political answer to, no, we want our independence, de-risking, blah, 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 blah. It's that we can't afford to move away from China. My point is, let's focus on some secondary sanctions if they make sense. I think what we have is to engage in serious dialogue in order to see where and in which capacity Russia is helping third countries to increase the pressure. So I think this approach is a good one, but it should be targeted and directed related to Russia. What I think, I don't know what, with just Europeans, with the US administration, is working hard in all capacity, product by product, to see the countries allaying Russia, sometimes in a third, because you don't want to sanction, because you don't sanction directly Russia, but a third country is helping them, and the job is to be made, has already started technically. I'm totally in favour of this job. But we know what the US has said, what Trump has said is, no, we are ready to do it if you're ready to do it, because we are not going to be funding this if then you are still taking money. We're not going to sanction further massively secondary sanction Russia and China and India if then the European countries are still sucking on the teat of cheap energy or product or commerce. And I'm completely with the US on that side, and I criticise the US more than anyone, but it does make sense. And this is where Zelensky, he's just missing the whole point of this. And this is an interview about a week ago with Zelensky. Let's speed this up to maybe 1.5 times.
I believe that the US is strong enough to take decisions of their own. I believe Donald Trump can give us air defense systems in quantity, and US has enough. I'm sure US can apply enough sanctions in order to hurt the Russian economy. Plus, Donald Trump has enough force to make Putin afraid of him.
So all these things may be true, but what Trump is asking is, hang on, if I'm also all the weapons of NATO, I'm the money of the West, I've got problems domestically at home. And if the European countries, they're not willing to do anything, well, I'm not going to be doing just all of it.
Europe, in this case, should simply be in alliance with the US. And of course, it's a big help for Americans to put pressure on Putin. But we need to understand that we just can't wait for all European countries to stop relations with Russia, whether it's oil or...
So we can't wait for the European countries. The US must do it. But what the US is doing is, you guys, Russia is on your borders. You're asking me to do a lot. Hey, how about you up your game?
Gas. So in this, he is right. Europe should stop purchasing fuel and gas, but we shouldn't wait. I disagree with that. I think the US is strong enough on its own.
But this isn't what it is, though, because then the US is saying we don't. This is the rhetoric of it. The rhetoric of continuing to buy this, but asking us for billions of dollars while you say it's an existential threat. Something's not adding up here.
And Europe, I mean, it's many different countries. It's the EU countries, other European nations outside EU, and each country has its own bureaucracy, decision-making protocols, etc. Whereas US is just one country with one vertical, system. They can make this happen quicker. Besides, Europe has already introduced 18 sanction packages.
So he's not wrong. The US has a lot of power. They may be able to do this quicker. But what Trump is ultimately asking for is Europe to give up something. If the US is going to sanction China while providing the protection to Ukraine, the protection to Europe, and Europe is still buying in these Chinese goods, still doing trade, still buying oil from Russia, still buying X, Y, and Z, the US is going, we're not getting screwed over again and again. Why is the more powerful nation here being fucked at every corner? And this is ultimately where a lot of Trump stuff boils down to, even if I believe some of it is actually a threat and goes way beyond where Western commerce and trade should be occurring. But let's have a look through some other parts of this. That Zelensky says, therefore, I believe that all countries need to stop thinking about themselves and their future relations with Russia, but instead think about Ukraine. Now, this is a utopian vision for large states. This is a Zelensky utopianist viewpoint. The US in particular, they act as a realist in international relations, and they rightfully always will pursue its interest and its survival first and foremost. Reason of state, raison d'etat. That is how great states operate. They will not be putting Ukraine before themselves, and if they see future relations with Russia as a way to quell China, that's where I've said I think we'll see a lot of this kick back up. China is the threat to US dominance, hegemony, whatever you want to call it. And as I said, if they see Russia as the power balancer, which I think likely they will, and India already is a massive power balancer, regardless of the ideology that sits in the Kremlin or sits in Washington or sits in New Delhi, they will work with them to oppose a greater foe. And this is the thing. If all countries need to stop thinking about themselves and their future relations, International Affairs 101 does not work and has never worked like that. And if a great state like America starts thinking like that, it's the end of when they're a great state. Now, Zelensky goes a little bit hard on Trump here. Was Alaska a mistake was a question. Well, he said, I think it gave a lot to Putin. It was escape from political isolation. I believe he should have paid more. Now, what we have seen, especially in the SCO, was Putin has not been frozen out. He's just been frozen out from Western politics. But now, with America, he's not. And he said he should have received a setback in this war and stopped. But instead he received de-isolation, he got photos with Trump and received a public dialogue. And I think that opens the doors for Putin in some of the summit formats. And that's how it is when we're observing. I don't think he paid anything for it. And he should pay firstly for what he started in this war. And secondly, because he wants a way out. And therefore, it's important not to give Putin this space because otherwise he won't. I feel that compelled to stop the war because if he's fighting and waging war and everyone else is trying to stop him arguing just by asking, but instead force should be used. He understands force. That's his language. That's the language he understands. He doesn't speak. So Zelensky again on that we shouldn't have given anything here. Like Trump should not have done this with Putin. Should have frozen him out of then US talk, and that more force should have been applied. What I think where the US is going is how much force can we really apply and how much force can we apply before it starts reducing our own security and independence at home as well. And again, this is utopian, that America is not going to think about Ukraine first before itself. And if Ukraine becomes a threat because of the relationship between Russia and China, becomes a threat to US dominance, and resource dominance and all of this stuff, America will look for ways out. And in my opinion, and this may be a bit conspiratorial, but I think Trump has put terms on Europe that it knows Europe will not accept. And if Europe does accept them, they'll be just a vassal of America because it'll be so fucking catastrophic for Europe. It's giving Trump a way to step back out of this. Legends, have a fantastic day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.